Thanks so much for being with us here on Atlanta News First Plus. I'm Joy Lim Nakrin, joined here by a very special guest that we have joining us today. We have Agent Trebor Randle, who was a long time, really her list of accomplishments is very impressive, but she was a long time special agent with the GBI in charge of child fatalities. Thank you so much, Agent Randle, for being with us. So unfortunately, the topic that we're here to talk about, is human trafficking, and I just want to share with our viewers we have this new report out today. This is the 2023 report card on child and youth sex trafficking here in the state of Georgia. I know you've had a chance to look through some of this, Agent Randle, and I'm just trying to make sense of it. This is really your area of expertise. I'm a little concerned that with the overall grade that we got, I'm trying to just get to the page where that is so I can show it to our viewers, because this is the overall grade that we got, a D. What do you think of that?
Right. I was looking at that, and it was a little disheartening, of course, when we look at the overall grade that we receive, but you have to take certain factors into consideration. Several of the things they looked at, one including the legislative side of things, or the side of things that deals with the courts and prosecution, criminal prosecution. Obviously, we were able in Georgia to get our safe harbor passage law, which was a big plus, so we can make sure that we're not criminalizing our victims once we do go out and we rescue our victims, or they come to us to self-disclose that they've been a victim. It's important that they're not charged, or if we discover who they are by way of working criminal investigations. So that was very important that we had the passage. So we did get credit for that. However, what you're seeing is our response on the prevention side, the side of training, how we're identifying those victims, and what we do after the fact to be able to provide for them. And that area maybe we're not doing so well in. I know that has been challenging for any number of years as I work with our child welfare agency in the state of Georgia. Sometimes that response is not created equally throughout our 159 counties here in Georgia. It varies.
Well, you're talking about some of the steps that have been taken, for instance, with legislation, and then you mentioned just kind of varying response. Do you think? I mean, what do you think really we need to focus on if we want to improve this issue? What's the answer?
Well, again, from the state, from Atlanta, from the Capitol, this was one of the many priorities of our governor here. We can roll out the legislation. We can roll out policies and best practices, but if they're not followed to the T, that presents a challenge. What the counties may be doing in Metro Atlanta is not always the same as what they may be doing on the coast, down in Savannah, or in the Southwest, or the southeast corner of the state. And that has always been one of our challenges, how we respond. I have to say that the law enforcement response is one of the things that I've been most proud of, not only being a part of GBI, an agency that has a human trafficking unit, but collectively. The child abuse model that's been rolled out by the state is mandated now that each one of the circuits throughout the state, as it relates to criminal prosecution, follows that. So that was a plus for us as well. But again, how we respond, those wraparound services, how we provide care for those victims varies depending on what area of the state you're in.
And when you talk about the care for those victims, are we talking about care, for instance, after they, I guess get out of the lifestyle? Is that kind of where you think maybe the gaps might be?
I know that we do have some gaps. It takes a huge amount of resources once you do come in contact with these children. In many cases, I know that sometimes we were faced with that challenge at GBI when we did rescue kids. What do you do with those kids? What does that look like? Sometimes we may have, an agent who's sitting with a child for 6 or 7 hours waiting for an agency to respond, and those things shouldn't be happening. But even when we do get that response, and those kids have to be housed somewhere. They have to be provided for their care, their medical, their mental, psychological, just so many things, clothing, shelter. And then
Yeah.
in some cases, those children may actually run away from those places.
Yeah,
They fail
yeah.
to identify as victims themselves. So that is very common throughout the United States as far as
Yeah.
challenges that we see.
So you are emphasizing that we are talking about kids. What age range did you typically see in your work at GBI when it comes to victims of human trafficking, youth victims?
Unfortunately, ages 12 to 14. We know that the average age when these kids become exposed, a lot of times, unfortunately, are brought into this world, whether it's voluntarily because they are coaxed into it, or whether they're pulled into it involuntarily, is between the ages of 12, 13. And we also know the majority of them
Wow,
are female,
that's
but it's
stunning.
important from an awareness standpoint that the public know that our young men and boys are also victims.
Now, just for members of the public, to be more educated and maybe in a position to help, what should people watch out for as signs that that someone, maybe a young person, maybe a young woman, 12 to 14 years old, has been targeted for to be a victim of human trafficking?
I think it's very important for the awareness piece, that education piece, parents, educators. It is so important that they educate themselves. We have a lot of resources out there available to them, toolkits, faith-based communities. We really need their help in getting this message out, because it's a misnomer that these are necessarily the what we classified as the runaway kids, or what you consider to be a bad kid or a troubled youth. These are kids that sometimes go to school every day after school.
Wow.
They
Wow.
are engaging in this type of behavior because they are trusting of someone who may have presented
Really?
themselves
Wow.
to them as a boyfriend. You know, the modern day pimps, as we used to call them back in the day, they don't look like that anymore. They look like any number of young men or women that may entice these young kids to say, hey, I care about you, I'm your boyfriend, I just want you to meet some other people. They are pulled into this and groomed for this in so many different ways. So get it out of your head that this necessarily looks like a tractor trailer full of kids who are being brought in across the border. We know that in the United States, our trafficking victims are more likely going to be U.S. citizens, although we do have those instances where you have kids who have been brought in from other areas, from across state lines, and many times they don't even know where they are.
Wow. Well, you're talking about coercing these young people to get involved in this, and I mean, and it is important to know if they are, under the age of 18, they can't legally consent anyway. It is important to note that they're considered minors, they're children. So even if in some sense they go along with it, they're not consenting adults.
That's correct.
But I want to ask you, what kind of techniques would someone who lures these victims use? Would they say, "Oh, I know a way that you can earn, more money," or what do they use to entice these victims?
Thank you, Joy. That's important. Right now, social media is one of the number one. It's certainly up there. One of the ways that they use to recruit these individuals. And like I said, sometimes they will ask the young offenders to maybe introduce them to one of their friends. To come to parties. Sometimes they call them and say they're going to make some money. But many times when we rescue these victims, or we talk to these young ladies after these operations, we find out that they have been forced to have sex with multiple individuals at any given time, or work these parties as strippers and other horrendous things, and they actually don't get money, or they get very little money.
What else do you think is important? I mean, just for members of the public to know. I mean, parents. How does a parent know? Hey, this friend is not really this friend may be suspicious, or this friend may be somebody to be concerned about. How do parents know?
Especially for those younger ones, like I mentioned, 12 years old is very common. It's about our average age of entry into this unfortunate world. We know that our parents give the kids too much freedom, and I'm telling you that, in my opinion, as an investigator of 30 years, a lot of children have a lot of privacy now. We don't want to go through their cell phones. We don't want to check their social media, and that is so very important to keep them safe. Any number of times when police respond to take a report that their child is missing, law enforcement finds out much too late that they have been talking with someone new that they met online that
Wow.
they kept secret from their family. They maybe thought it was a child and it turns out to be an adult, but now they've developed a rapport with your child, and they have gotten them to trust them in many ways, where they were comfortable enough to willingly leave home on their own. Just the other day, I was called into a situation where we had a 13-year-old who went away from home with a group of about 3 girls. And no one would talk to the authorities, no one would talk to the police, and they never know that they're getting into a life of what could be a crime, or a life that's going to suck them down that dark hole, and they end up being trafficking victims. It always starts by them getting false information and someone pretending to be something that they're not, or in many cases drugs. Once they get that taste, unfortunately, of certain drugs that they're introduced to, they want more of that, and that's also used over their head as a tool.
Wow. So what do parents do? I mean, or friends or teachers, anybody who might be watching, if they get an inkling. I mean, like you said, being proactive. Checking social media accounts if it's your child, things like that, and don't be afraid to check the phone. And I guess invade privacy by some people's standards, but they're minors, and you're a guardian, so you have to remember that they don't have the same privileges.
That's right.
But say you find something, if you're a mom, on your child's social media that you think is suspicious, that could be essentially bringing your child down this path. What do you do?
I would encourage those parents to take action. That's number one. Do something. It's kind of like the saying we use, if you see something, say something. What does that look like? Whether that requires a 911 phone call so you can get a response, or calling a non-emergency number for your local police department, your local sheriff's office. Any number of them have individuals that will come out, and sometimes it's just about prevention. Prevention is so important. We call it upstream prevention. Let's find out what's happening. Let's get to this child who may be going down the wrong path before it's too late, instead of fishing them out on the other end, keep them from falling into this trap, if you will. But you have to get someone that specializes in the area to come out and talk with them. I always tell them, don't wait. They may say, well, there's nothing I can do. Nothing has happened yet. They've gone away from home a couple of times, didn't come home. Let us come and get that one-on-one interaction with them ahead of time. Certainly if you have a youth that is known to the system, our child welfare system, or maybe DFACS has been involved already, let the case managers know that you are concerned for them. We know that there are many risk factors that are going to make the kids more likely to fall into this trap, and those that are troubled obviously have a higher risk.
I want to ask you, because we early on were talking about certain counties or that may be less compliant than others in terms of following the protocols and so forth. Are there certain areas that are higher risk?
Obviously our metro areas.
Okay.
And that's obviously, look at our numbers for one, the population and the size. But unfortunately here in Georgia, a lot of times when I lecture around the world, I talk about Georgia and Atlanta being a hub. And that's, airing our dirty laundry is not something we're proud of, but unfortunately, because we are a metro area, because of the number of strip clubs, the nightlife, just being honest, our sports venue, and the number of colleges and universities that are heavily concentrated in the metro Atlanta, we see a very high number, and it makes it really popular. Anytime you have very large events that come to a city, you're going to see crime increase as well. And unfortunately, sex trafficking is one of those crimes.
Any final advice for people if they want to just help?
Absolutely. So, like I said, you can go to your local office's website, but for the state of Georgia, obviously we have the Grace Commission, which is which was a priority for this administration and is led by our First Lady. You can go and find a lot of information there, a lot of toolkits, also with our child welfare serving agencies such as DFACS as well. But many law enforcement agencies, sheriff's offices, has an area where you can go. NCMEC, which is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, is also a partner in this fight against sex trafficking, especially of our kids and young people. So there's a ton of information out there. You can contact us to be able to come to your city, to your community events, and talk with the community as well.
All right, thank you so much, Agent Trebor Randle, for your expertise on this topic. And of course, we're going to keep following all the developments on this here on Atlanta News First Plus. Thanks so much for joining us.